The average text takes your eyes off the road for nearly 5 seconds. At highway speeds, that's enough time to travel the length of a football field. Stop the texts, stop the wrecks.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Your Future, Your Finances. We have a very interesting segment for you today. We're speaking with an independent journalist who has spent time in Syria, certainly one of the countries and events in the world these days that is top of mind, and a lot going on there, a lot to understand perhaps about what's going on there. So I'm speaking with Flavius Mihaies, who is independent journalist as well as a consultant to the World Bank. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be here.
The experience of Syria is part of a book you're doing. So tell us a little bit about the book and your time that you spent in Syria.
Absolutely. It started around 2 years ago. I volunteered in a Syrian refugee camp run by the UNHCR in Iraq. And the camp comprised Syrian that had escaped the fighting, the conflict in their home country. And from that start, I really got interested and involved into the situation and understanding it and sharing it as it became more and more complex. And the narrative that we were hearing in Washington in the media were not necessarily some differences with what I would see on the ground. So that took me to another trip and then another trip. And now the book will be the result, the outcome of that experience.
And you were there over a period of years.
Correct.
What was the time period?
My first trip volunteering in the camp was in December 2014. I spent 3 weeks in complete immersion in northern Iraq, in a Kurdish-controlled region, semi-autonomous region. There was about 3,000, 4,000 refugees under the care of the United Nations and the Iraqi government. And many of these refugees were sharing stories about their family and their journey. And at that point, the northern part of Syria, northern eastern part of Syria was under also a form of autonomy run by the Kurdish political party. And the interesting event, obviously, around that time was the battle for Kobane, where the Kurds took the headlines with their courage and their heroism fighting the Islamic State, and in fact led to the intervention of the US and the coalition to protect them. And so I could sense and witness a pro-Western feeling, and at this point, it's a gamble eventually, but I assume that it would be feasible to visit that region, given the general, of course it's a war zone, but given the general feeling toward the West that had stepped in to defend their land against the Islamic State. And that led to the second trip in northern Syria in May 2015. I spent about 3 weeks. I visited Kobane, and I returned to Washington. And my third trip was in Damascus. In August 2015, we drove the road to Damascus, literally speaking, with church members, prelate. And I spent about 2 weeks between Damascus, Homs, that was just destroyed, very, very similar to Kobane. The Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad had regained control of Homs recently, and you could see the fierceness of the battle. And then I spent a bit of time in between in the villages, including some Christian villages that had been briefly occupied, swept through by Islamist groups. Some harrowing experience for the inhabitants that I could relate, and in papers and articles that I wrote when I returned to Washington. And most recently, I was in Iraq. I flew back to the north of Iraq in Erbil, the capital, quote-unquote, of the Kurdish region. And my interest was to witness and to document the road to Mosul, the liberations of Mosul. And the territories around Mosul are the historical birthplace of Christians in Iraq, if not the Middle East. Including the city of Karakosh, etc. And I could spend time in those villages and also see the extent of the damage that, if your town gets swept through by the Islamic State, it's not very pretty. And they used, for example, to give you an anecdote, they used the churches as shooting range and arms depot because they anticipated that the coalition would not bomb the churches, and so they left the church in a pretty dire state.
And you mentioned, as you were explaining that, you were noticing that the media here, perhaps, not writing on it is incorrect, but just different, or there's a lot to understand about what's going on over there. What was it like being there and then reading what America and its media is talking about?
Well, it's a good question, Brian. First off, I want to give credit to the media. So it's a very complex, difficult situation, very volatile in Syria, and recently it was named Syria the world most dangerous country for journalists, and we've seen some pretty terrible illustration of that over the last few years. But I work from the assumption that sitting on the ground, be it in Syria or in Cairo or in Montgomery County, will give you a different approach and feel than perhaps someone will report from the information they get on social media or by having phone calls. And indeed, when you are there on the ground, you can grasp in a more with more richness the complexity of the situation, the agenda of the different groups, their revendication, and you gain that understanding by really spending time. Gaining the trust, spending time, and from that point, you see the nuances that are not necessarily reflected. But you also in mainstream media, but you also see more clearly if there is maybe intentional or not an agenda. For example, some media were by sort of default anti-Assad, anti-Syria, Syrian government. Some media in the Middle East that are affiliated with Qatar, for example, the country of Qatar. So I will be sitting in Damascus in May 2015 and get shelled by the rebels, the opposition, whatever you call them, and they would send these artisanal mortars, and they would fail around. It's a dangerous situation that the civilians told me they had been through for the last 2-3 years. When the rebel, the opposition, the armed group made this onslaught into Damascus. At this point, the West thought around 2013 that Assad would fall. He did not, as we all know, and in large part thanks to the allies that lined up, Iran and Russia. But the rebel had kept some neighborhoods, some pockets of neighborhoods, and they were systematically daily shelling the downtown Damascus. And the West and some of the media were reporting on Assad shelling, Assad bombing the opposition-controlled area, which was absolutely horrifying. I mean, there's no justification for such crimes. But I would get bombed by the rebels, and I would not see that in the press, in the media. Also, that sort of also makes you do this suffering and suffering, depending on who you address. And indeed, I came back to America after that trip. It was about October 2015, and I met with a friend in one of the main.
Let's take a break, and we'll get right onto that topic and get on to America and its role in that country, as well as your works covering it, which are fascinating. We'll be right back. You're watching Your Future, Your Finances. We're speaking with Flavius Mihaies, who has a book coming out on Syria and the conflict, who is an independent journalist and consultant to the World Bank. We'll be right back.